What's going on, everybody? Good late afternoon. Hope you guys are doing well, and we got to take some time to talk about this. We got to get into this a little bit. We got to be open and honest and real about what I have put on screen in front of you guys, and we got to discuss the potential ramifications of it. The Seahawks offense has died. The Seattle Seahawks offense has died over the last month and a half to 2 months. And it's not hard to see why, but that doesn't mean some people that may not be entirely to blame for it aren't going to be held accountable for it, right? We got this field goals article here. I'm not going to go through the article in this video, but you can if you want to. It's just on field goals. But the lead here is really what I want to talk about in this video a little bit, and then I want to talk about what might be done about it. Since week 7, so that would be the Atlanta game. So I'm guessing this is after the Atlanta game ended, but maybe it includes the Atlanta game too, and if so, that's even worse. The Seahawks offense ranks 32nd in the league by DVOA. If you don't know what DVOA is, I'm not going to get super deep into it, but basically it's a stat that is trying to use one number to capture the effectiveness of a particular unit or team. So basically it's trying to boil everything down into one number that goes positive or negative based on whether or not the team is doing things positively or negatively. If you want to know the exact details, look it up. I'm not saying DVOA is the end-all be-all. I'm a bigger fan of EPA. But EPA is not very favorable for the Seahawks either. You can use whatever metric you want to use. The Seahawks offense got off to a good start. They played really good early in the season. But at the same time, this collapse in DVOA doesn't even include things like the first Niners game where they really weren't that good, or the Giants game where they really weren't that good. And I think we all know it's the offensive line. I understand that. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think the offensive line being as bad as it is makes it hard to fairly evaluate anything. But at the same time, I don't think I can sit here and say that Ryan Grubb is doing everything that a coach can do or should do to overcome what is going on with the offensive line. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it, and people are going to get upset at me for saying it because of what it implies, but it's true. Shane Waldron did better than this with an offensive line almost as bad. Last year, the Seahawks had a better offense than this offense. They did. They produced better. They were more consistent. And that offensive line might have been better than this one, but it was really bad. That was a really bad offensive line. And Waldron found a way to actually have them at a respectable level. They had bad games. They had bad moments. Don't get me wrong. But Waldron did better than this. And Waldron will probably never work as an offensive coordinator in the NFL again after what happened in Chicago. Now, that's because he was way worse in Chicago than he was here. But the point I'm trying to make is that Ryan Grubb is not blameless here. Ryan Grubb is doing things that are causing problems. And I think he's doing more things to hurt the team than he is to help the team right now. I do. Obviously, things would be going really well right now if we had a good offensive line. But I also think things would be going better, significantly better right now with a better offensive coordinator. So I said after that Jets game that I'm kind of done with Grubb in the sense that I want him to finish out the year. And if things improve and I see better things over the next few weeks, then I'm open to changing my mind. But if things stay in this same basic stratosphere, then I want a new offensive coordinator next year. And a couple of people in the comments said, oh, you can't do that. It's his first year. He's never coached in the NFL before. We got to give him more time. We got to give him a second year to see how he adjusts. And look, I'm usually the guy who's patient. I'm usually the guy who is open to letting guys have another chance. I'm a believer in letting things play out over the course of a few seasons. And I'll even go so far as to say I think it was fair to expect some real problems this year because of Ryan Grubb. and that we should have been willing to live with that and should have been willing to roll into 2025 with him pretty much no matter what happened. But it's not just about Ryan Grubb, people, because here's what I want to ask. If the Seattle Seahawks fire Ryan Grubb in the offseason, let's say their offense doesn't improve, maybe they still make the playoffs, but maybe the offense doesn't really get better, and they decide, look, the offensive line, yeah, it reeks, but we don't think that justifies all of the bad things that happened, so we're going to get a new OC. Who is going to be that new OC? Who replaces Ryan Grubb in this scenario? Who is your new Seahawks offensive coordinator, if not Ryan Grubb? And then I want you to look around the NFL right now, looking only at head coaches that are likely, possibly, or probably losing their job. And this is why I've kind of come down this way. It's not just because of Grubb or the Seahawks offense. Let's look at some names here. Let's spend a little bit of time looking at these names. Mike McDaniel. I don't think the Dolphins are going to fire him, but there's some signs here that Mike McDaniel is a genius football mind who doesn't have the chutzpah to be an NFL head coach. Maybe he just doesn't have that it factor to actually be the head coach. And he doesn't have a bad track record. He's made the playoffs twice. Even this year, the Dolphins are not terrible, even though Tua has missed several games. But there's some indications here that the Dolphins are starting to believe that McDaniel just doesn't have that extra oomph to be a head coach in the NFL successfully. And if they believe that, if they get to the end of this year and they still believe that, they may fire him. And this guy, he comes from the Shanahan tree. He was an offensive coordinator in San Fran for 1 year. He came up a little bit under Houston way back in the 00s. He was a part of that great Redskins coaching staff, I think, with Shanahan and all of his disciples that are now ruling the NFL. Spent a little bit of time in Atlanta the year they won the Super Bowl under Shanahan. The year they went to the Super Bowl, rather, excuse me. And then he got to be Shanahan's protege for several years. This is a genius offensive mind. He just might not have that extra it factor to be the head coach. And if that's the case, if you have the opportunity to run it back with Grubb or go get Mike McDaniel to be your offensive coordinator next year, I don't think there's a decision there. This guy is a genius. You want to have a run scheme? Mike McDaniel will take care of that. Zach Taylor. Is this it for him? I don't know. I don't know. The things that happen with the Bengals don't really make a lot of sense to me. To me, he should be gone. But I also acknowledge that he made the Super Bowl several years ago, and the Bengals are not like other teams. The Bengals are going to give people a big opportunity to fail and still keep their jobs because they have a very bad owner. Although maybe that's starting to change. I don't know. But if it were me, I'd fire Zach Taylor. Maybe the Bengals won't. But here's another guy. This is another one of those guys like McDaniel who spends 1 year as an offensive coordinator, and the teams out there are so impressed with what they see that they're like, yeah, we want this guy as a head coach now. And this is another guy, he came up in Miami, spent 1 year in college, and then spent a little bit of time at the Rams under McVay. This is a McVay guy, right? And he's been a head coach for 6 years. And this is something that I'm going to hammer on throughout this entire video as I talk about these guys. Every single person we're talking about here is overqualified to be an offensive coordinator, but they would probably have to be an offensive coordinator for 1 year, at least, because of the circumstance. Kevin Stefanski, this would be a dream. Kevin Stefanski, 2-time AP Coach of the Year. He might get martyred because of the Deshaun Watson situation and the fact that the Browns are having a bad year. I don't blame him at all for it. This is a guy who's won a playoff game with the Browns. He made the playoffs last year with like 5 different quarterbacks. I mean, this guy's great. This guy's amazing. He had a decent year in Minnesota as an OC in 2019. Spent a lot of time coming up in that Minnesota tree. I think he started under Brad Childress, and he spent a lot of time there under all the different coaches they've had over that decade and a half he spent. And he's a good head coach. Honestly, this is a guy who I think would get hired as a head coach somewhere else if he gets let go by the Browns. Honestly, I don't even know if I want to say the Browns would fire him. It'd be more like they're setting him free. But if you could get Kevin Stefanski as your offensive coordinator for a year, isn't that way, way better than keeping Ryan Grubb? Isn't that like a no-brainer? That's no decision. That's an easy one. This guy is way overqualified to be an offensive coordinator. If he has to spend 1 year as an offensive coordinator, you jump on that. Doug Pederson. I don't think this guy's ever going to be a head coach again. And admittedly, this is the kind of guy that I would look at as more of like a major domo for an offensive coordinator. Like maybe this is the guy you bring in to advise Ryan Grubb to kind of keep him a little bit more in check. But Doug Pederson was a guy who was born in Washington State. He's got some roots around here. He played high school in Ferndale. He was a Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator. A Super Bowl winning head coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. My bad, excuse me. He's an Andy Reid guy. He won a playoff game in Jacksonville. I know it's ended very poorly, but this guy is very clearly qualified to be an offensive coordinator in the NFL. He was qualified to be a head coach not that long ago. Now, it ultimately didn't work out, and after this year, he will have been fired twice in a 4-year span. I know that doesn't look good, but if you're hiring this guy as your offensive coordinator, you're probably going to get good results. Like again, he's overqualified. All of these guys are overqualified. These coaches that we're talking about have been at least moderately successful as head coaches. So, as an OC, you're hitting it out of the park. And again, I think Doug Pederson might work better as like an offensive assistant under someone like a Grubb, but either way, if you had to make a choice between Doug Pederson or Ryan Grubb, I think it's pretty easy. Mike McCarthy. This is another guy who I would prefer as like an assistant, somebody acting as like an advisor to a Ryan Grubb to try to balance out some of his bad tendencies. But if you had the chance to get Mike McCarthy as an offensive coordinator, this guy's been a head coach in the NFL for almost 2 decades. He's won a Super Bowl. He had a Cowboys team that went 8-8 every year with Jason Garrett. That was the meme. Win 12 games 3 years in a row. And I know that it didn't end the way that they wanted it to end in Dallas, but there's a lot of reasons why things don't go the way they want them to go in Dallas that have nothing to do with the head coach. This is a guy who is more than qualified to be an offensive coordinator in this league. When he was an offensive coordinator for teams like the Saints before they got Sean Payton, he spent a year as the OC for the 49ers. He's, got a proven track record of doing good things at that level in the NFL. So if you had a chance to get a guy like a Mike McCarthy as your OC, that's better than Grubb. What about somebody like a Brian Daboll, who's probably going to get fired after this season ends? Look at what he did in Buffalo. And I know people are going to say, oh, look what Buffalo's doing now. They don't miss him. But there was a point in time where it really looked like Josh Allen missed his buddy. There was a point in time where it actually really looked like Josh Allen had turned into late-stage Brett Favre without Brian Daboll to keep things on him. But this guy's been an OC for a long time in this league. He spent 4 years in Buffalo as an OC. He was an OC in Kansas City for a year, Miami, Cleveland. Some stops less successful than others, but he's been a coach in the league for a very long time, actually. Since 2000, he's been in one role or another as a coach. He's been up, he's been down. There have been some moments where he was just like a tight end coach for the Patriots. He actually got 2 rings as a tight end coach on the Patriots. He's also a little bit of a Nick Saban guy. So you got Belichick, you got Saban, you got, I think this is before Andy Reid, he was on Kansas City, but there's actually a lot in his tree that is pretty dang good. And we know he can be a great OC, and I don't think he's been that bad of a coach. I think he's been a victim of circumstance. So if you could get Brian Daboll as your OC, maybe he's not cut out to be a head coach because of his attitude. Maybe there's a little bit of that going on, but as an OC, yeah, you're going to get great results. And my favorite, this is a guy who is taking the year off, and maybe he's retired, Frank Reich. If you could get Frank Reich as your offensive coordinator, like this is the guy who was the OC for the Eagles the year they won the Super Bowl. This was an OC with Phillip Rivers with the Chargers. He was not a bad head coach in Indy. He just wasn't good enough. Didn't last. Ended up getting fired. Okay. But he can be an OC. Don't tell me about nothing that happened in Carolina. Don't act like that's his fault. This is a guy who is well and clearly overqualified to be an OC, but if he gets a job in the NFL right now, it'll have to be as an OC because his last 2 stops didn't go that well. That's just circumstance. This guy's not even a bad head coach. And we're just really kind of scratching the surface here. There are other guys out there. Tanner Engstrand from Detroit. If Ben Johnson leaves this offseason, then Tanner's probably going to get the best job that he can if he doesn't want to stay in Detroit, which maybe he just gets promoted in Detroit, okay. But Tanner Engstrand might be available. You could go get somebody else from college, like Chip Kelly. And I know that's kind of a meme, but would you rather go with Chip Kelly or would you rather go with Ryan Grubb? At this point, I think that you can make a pretty compelling argument that you should go with Chip Kelly, and at least you'll have fun. At least it's good for content. There are going to be some other guys maybe coming out of college. Like, what if Kalen DeBoer comes out of college? Then you could get the milk for free. You don't have to. You can go straight to the cow. You could say, hey, why do I have Ryan Grubb when I can go get Ryan Grubb's basically Ryan Grubb's minder, Ryan Grubb's the brains behind Ryan Grubb maybe. What if you go get there are a bunch of other guys. Like, I could sit here all day and name normal candidates, but what I'm trying to say is this offseason may be populated with some really good OC candidates, guys who are overqualified, in some cases very overqualified, and are only available probably for 1 year because of circumstance. So guys like Mike McDaniel, guys like Stefanski especially, guys like Brian Daboll, they would be rock stars as OCs again. And that's probably better than whatever Ryan Grubb's going to offer, even if he gets better next year. I'm sorry. And we know that OCs don't last very long anyway on any team. You don't see OCs last for 10 years on teams. You don't see OCs last for 5 years very often anymore. OCs cycle through in and out anyway. So when the iron is hot, you strike. And if you can get somebody better than Ryan Grubb, even if it's only going to be better for 2 years or 3 years, you do it. Because that's the normal cycle of an OC anyway. All right, so we'll see what happens these next 5 weeks, but I'm telling you, if things don't drastically improve, I'm very confident we can do better this offseason by trying to find somebody else, because there's going to be a lot of fish in the sea. Really good fish. Better fish than Ryan Grubb, I'm sorry. All right, see you guys later. Go Hawks. Let me know what you think.